Well, hey everybody, my name is Brad. I'm one of the pastors here at Copper Hills, and I'm glad to welcome you to Copper Hills, especially our church family at home, wherever you are. If you're like up on the rim waiting for snow, like a foot or two, whatever that is, have fun. Hope you make it back home. Yeah, really. If you're in our auditorium, welcome. I would love the opportunity to meet you. If I haven't yet, I'll be on the plaza area here for a little bit after this gathering, and if you'll stop by and say hi, I would like to introduce myself to you personally. Over the last 10 months or so that we've all been dealing with the reality of COVID, there's something that we haven't done as a church, and that is to provide a pathway or explain a pathway and how you might become part of, like a formal member of our Copper Hills family. So if you're interested in that, on Wednesday, February 3rd, from 7 to 9, we're going to do something we call Copper Hills 101. Now, it might be you're just interested in information about Copper Hills. That would be for you. You might have been around long enough to go, hey, this is our church home. We want to plug in. We want to make that kind of official. That would be for you as well. So if you're interested, go to our website, copperhills.org/events, and you'll be able to register for that. And we'd love to see you that evening. Here's something else that's happening. I want to take just a minute or two to talk a little bit about it. When Jesus began his public ministry here on earth, one of the first things that he did was to go through a process of baptism. And that was a significant step. He did it for different reasons than you and I might do it. But it was very significant in the course of his becoming the Savior of the world. It was a step in that direction in the journey. Then as he departs earth, some 3.5 years later or so, he turns to his followers and he says, now, baptism is such a significant deal for people who are followers of mine. I want you to go around the world and baptize people. That's what I want you to do. And then here's what happened with that. In some cases, in some faiths, they took that as a prerequisite to getting to heaven. And so when baptisms are done in some faiths, it's a religious practice. It is something that hopefully takes, and it's at that point that they think their sins would be forgiven, which would be the obstacle for them getting to heaven, and as a result of being baptized, to get to go to heaven. That's actually not what Jesus had in mind. Jesus had this in mind, that there would be human beings around the world who would come to a realization that life independent of God was just not a life that was fulfilling and rich and full, and more than that, it was a life that they would never experience spiritual life, which is what Jesus came to give us. And for every human being who's ever come to that place of recognizing that they live independent of God, and there are dire consequences for that, not only here, but actually for eternity, and they humble themselves enough to admit that, ask God to forgive them, Jesus steps in and says, I've taken care of that. I died on a cross so that you wouldn't have to pay the consequences of your independence, and I'm giving you new life. As a result of my death, you have new life. And so if that's happened to you, it's a wonderful thing I'm going to give you, and that is I'm going to let you dramatize what's happened in your life. You're going to do it one time in your life. It's a big deal. You don't have to do it more than once. Do it when you understand, when you grasp what I've done for you. Why don't you go ahead and symbolically do what's really, really happened in your life, and that is that you have become clean. Your sins have been washed away, and you're a new person. You've gone from death to life, and that's why we choose to do baptism the way we do it. We get a 500-gallon tank right out here, fill the thing with water, and we get people wet, like wet, dead. We don't hold them till they're dead, right? But then they come up to new life, and they come up clean, and it's not as a result of a little bit of water or a lot of water. It's just a dramatization of what Jesus has already done. And so, if you've never been baptized, or maybe you were baptized as a little child, or you just didn't grasp what exactly that was all about, can I invite you to consider making that a definitive celebration that you would have? We're going to do a baptism on February 20th and 21. And if you're interested in that or getting some information, would you let us know in our church office? You can email us, chc@copperhills.org, and we'll give you a little bit more information what the process is. But this is such a big deal. And if that's not been part of your celebration, it's like a public statement of whose you are and what Jesus has done for you? Would you consider doing that? All right, I take that as a yes. Okay, so I want to pick up a passage of Scripture in the series that we relaunched, started again last week with Pastor Paul before Christmas, and then now again right up to Easter. We're looking at the eyewitness account that Peter and likely his scribe Mark, who writes it for him, tell us about the 3.5 years that they spent with Jesus, from fishermen to all the way through to Jesus' ascension to heaven. And we're looking at it kind of a chunk, a section at a time, and trying to learn, dig a little deeper into it to see what exactly we can learn from that experience, because you and I weren't there. And sometimes it's a little hard to figure out exactly, okay, how does that apply in our world? And today's a prime example of that. This odd, strange event that we're going to look at that happens can be really confusing, and we can almost lose the significance of it because it's so odd. It's a bit mysterious. So we're going to pick up from Mark chapter 9, verse 2. Encourage you to grab your Bible, your tablet, your phone, whatever it is. And can I encourage you to bring it with you? We do the courtesy of putting it up on the screen, but it's not a substitute for actually reading it with us, with your text, with a pen, or making notes on your tablet or whatever you have. Engage with it, and you'll get so much more out of it, because you also get to, during those really boring parts of what I talk about, you can go read around it and you'll learn. Well, I'm being boring. Okay, here we go. Mark chapter 9, verse 2. It says, "After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone." Now pause for just a second. I want to give you a little bit of context of what's happened here so you can kind of imagine being part of the story. This is where Pastor Paul left us last week. Jesus and his 12 guys have walked about 28 miles north of their northern Israel headquarters of Capernaum, which is right on the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee, headed north from there to an area called Caesarea Philippi. I think we're going to put up a map here to tell you. So they take this walk up there, and what's attracted them to it, this is a really pagan part of the nation, and odd that they would go there, but there was something there that attracted them. Here's a picture of the ruins of what exactly that's how it looks today. It wasn't exactly like that then. But what it was is it was an opportunity to get his friends away from the crowds and to ask them a pivotal question that every one of us have to ask as well. He turns to them and says, so after 2.5 or 3 years, however long it had been together, after all that they had seen Jesus do and all that he had taught, the miracles, the control of weather patterns, healing people of diseases that were fatal, bringing people back to life, he turns to them and says, so who do you say I am? Which is the pivotal question for all of us. And some of us ask it kind of informally, or it's kind of rolling in the back of our minds, but we don't have the courage to ask in case we get the answer we're really looking for. And Jesus is after something. He's not after the right answer. He's after their answer. He's after what they really thought. He wasn't trying to program something in them. He wanted them to come to grips and to wrestle with who he was and what he had done, because he knew this about it. If they did not find him to be who he really was, they would miss out on what Jesus had come to do. And it's still the same for us 2,000 years later. We get that wrong because he's the author of life. He's the only way to have spiritual life. We get that wrong. We miss so much. And so it's still a question for us today. And fortunately, Peter does get it right, one of the guys in the group. And he declares after being with you, Jesus, these times, I come to the conclusion you're the Messiah. You're the King of Kings. You're Lord over everything. You are supreme over everything. You are the Messiah, the long-awaited one, the one that was promised. You're it, Jesus. You are it. And it would have been wonderful if Jesus had just left it at that, to go, yeah, that's right. Peter's got it, because they would all high-five each other and they would cheer, and they could look forward to getting down to Jerusalem, which they were going to head for there in just a little bit, and Jesus could take his throne, and there'd be this whole inauguration parade with the bands and the processional into Jerusalem and the crowds, the vast throng of people cheering citizens, the Romans shamefully slinking back to Rome, and this great kingdom of Jesus would take its place. If only they had just stopped there. But Jesus couldn't just leave it there. He had to ruin the mood by telling them that it was in fact crucifixion, not a coronation, that waited for them in Jerusalem. Jesus tells his guys that when they leave Caesarea Philippi, that they're going to head down south to Jerusalem. And what awaits them there is suffering of many things, rejection by the religious leaders, and ultimately death. Now that'll kill a party mood. It really will. At which Peter jumps up into the conversation and he rebukes Jesus for talking that way. Jesus, that's a mood killer. Cut it out. This is not what the guys need to hear right now. Let's do a little more of Messiah, King of everything talk. That's far better for this moment. And then, either because this was Jesus' intentional plan all along, it was part of his strategy, or I wonder if he read the moment and heard the conversations that the guys had following that and saw the kind of mood in their souls and their hearts change from joy and expectation to despair and disappointment. Jesus does something. We're told that he takes 3 of his closest friends, the guys that were probably the inner core. We just read it. Peter, James, and John. And he decides to take the 3 of them to a secluded mountaintop for a very specific purpose. We're going to find out in just a second why exactly Jesus does that with this small group of people. Have you noticed there's a lot of mountain events in the Bible? Jesus does a lot of things on mountains. Now here's the thing, the mountain that he took these 3 guys to, we don't know which mountain that is. There are 6 or 7 ideas that have been postulated as to which it is. There are 2 of the most common ones. And one of them is that there's a range of mountains right around Caesarea Philippi, which is about 15 miles from Caesarea Philippi. And I think we've got a map to show you where that is. And it's Mount Hermon. It's this range of about 45 miles of mountain range. 3 peaks are the tallest peaks. The tallest of them all is Mount Hermon. And it's about 9,000 feet, something like that. My personal thought, and it doesn't matter what my thoughts are, because it really doesn't matter which mountain it is, I think he took them there. I think he walked to the top of this mountain where they could survey the whole kingdom. And Jesus is something very important that he wants to share with them. It's a critical event. It could just be that picture. We might be looking at the very place that Jesus does this next mysterious, amazing, wonderful, hugely impactful deal. You know what it is? Here it is. Mark 9 goes on to say, there he, that's Jesus, was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Can you picture that? Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Of course they were. Then a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and the voice came from the cloud, this is God's voice. This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him. Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had been raised from the dead. They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. So here's what appears to be happening. 6 days before this miraculous and amazing, mysterious event on a mountain, remember, Jesus has just asked, who do you say that I am? And on the heels of that, rather than celebrating it, he says, now we're going to leave for Jerusalem, and it's going to be a very difficult journey that we're going to take in the days ahead. There's going to be betrayal and torture, and death is certainly going to happen. And when he says that, I think all they could think about was torture and betrayal and certain death. All they could think about were these terrible, looming, grim words that Jesus had spoken. Their minds were filled with a sense of foreboding and fear and jeopardy. Wouldn't they be? Of course they would be. So what do you think the conversations are within the group beside the evening fire over those 6 days since Jesus says terrible things are going to happen? When they huddle together or they're walking to the next place, what do you think they're talking about with each other? What do you think they're talking to Jesus about? What's occupying all of the conversation? I think it's this. Jesus, let's not go to Jerusalem. Let's not go. Let's find another way to do this one. Because Jesus, if that's what waits us in Jerusalem, death and torture and betrayal, that is not good. That's not a good end to this movement that we're in. It's just not. It doesn't spell success. Besides Jesus, you can raise people from the dead. You can control weather patterns. You can do all those great things. If we do go to Jerusalem, why don't you just prevent all that stuff from happening? You can do great things, but it's safer if we just don't go to Jerusalem. Let's not go to Jerusalem. Maybe it was for them an appeal to Jesus that there was a great risk that the movement that they had started and had been part of would be discredited. And, well, if the leader of the movement isn't there, what do you have left in terms of a movement? Everything that you started, Jesus, everything that you did, how you caught the public imagination, it's all going to be gone if we go. It's a bad idea. It's a very bad idea to go to Jerusalem. But Jesus insists, doesn't he? As the days unfold, as those 6 days, 3 becomes 5, 6 days through the week, all they've talked about for 6 days is what waits them in Jerusalem. And they can't seem to get Jesus to not go to Jerusalem. And then, because they're humans, and if we were part of that group, this is what we would probably do. The attention moves from Jesus. It's not good for the move. It's not good for you. It's not good for us. Because by implication, Jesus, if you die, what are the chances we get spared that? If you get betrayed, won't we be implicated with? What's the effect on us, Jesus? They were all aware that they had given up everything to follow Jesus. And if Jesus was right about what awaited them in Jerusalem, that sacrifice might be more than they bargained for when they signed up and said yes to his invitation to follow them. We know that they kind of kept track of what they had given. There's a point at one point where a really rich guy comes to Jesus and says, what do I have to do to inherit the kingdom? And Jesus gives him, sell everything you have. And the guy can't do it. And Peter pipes up, same story, same gospel story. He says, Jesus, we have given up everything for you. They knew what they had given up. They'd given up their businesses, income, conveniences, comfort, security, being away from their families, their reputation, their status. And now even physical danger, torture, and death probably awaited them. Jesus, let's not go to Jerusalem. I wonder if for 6 days this cloud of doom hangs over them, and Jesus sees their fear and confusion and growing doom. Things are getting darker, and Jesus decides to take 3 of the group, the closest of his friends and core leaders, up a mountainside, and into this darkness, a glimpse of light explodes onto the scene. You know when light is its brightest, right? When things around it are the darkest. Can you think back over the last 10 months? Hasn't felt like a lot of light, has it? It hasn't. But it's into this darkness, this uncertainty, that Jesus does something amazing and profound. We're told, the text says that he was transfigured before them. That's from the Greek word metamorphosai, which, can you guess what word we get from that? Metamorphosis. What comes to your mind from there? A larva, caterpillar larva turning into a butterfly. That's the same idea. It's kind of the same DNA, but it's totally different in its appearance. Its form has changed. And Jesus' form somehow changed in front of them. See, for 30 years, and for most of the 3 years prior to this, Jesus had not fully revealed who he was, what he was like. He had in so many ways expressed himself, but now he was going to give them a full expression of himself, and it would be these 3 guys that would see what that was. For all those years that Jesus was with them, the true shining glory had been veiled inside his human skin. It was there, but no one had seen it. And now, at the darkest moment, he is going to do for them something that's going to change their conversation. He shows who he really is, the fullness of what he calls his glory, the magnificence of who he is. This is what's so important in the details of what Mark and Peter give us. He says that they say that his clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. If you look at the other accounts of this same story from Matthew and from Luke, they're going to tell you that not only did his clothing change, but his face changed. something about the disposition of his face. In fact, they can't fully describe what it is. They say, well, it's like looking into the sun, or it's like a flash of lightning that lights up a dark, cloudy sky. It's brilliant and it stands out. It's not like anything else that we have seen, and that's what it looked like for Jesus' face to reveal the glory of who he was. Now, if you're interested in the Old Testament and you understand the Old Testament, you've read the Old Testament, does that remind you of anything that happened a couple of times in the Old Testament? Can you think of a couple of other times where that occurred? Well, one that comes to my mind, and I guess you've all heard of this person, his name is Moses. I quickly thought of that when I read this the first time. You see, if you were to page back to Exodus 33, you would pick up the story of God's deliverance of his people who were exiled and enslaved in Egypt for over 400 years. And God picks Moses to lead them out of Egypt to a promised land, a land that God had given them, a land of, as he described it over and again, of milk and honey. That just meant it was the place you wanted to be. They get out of Egypt. They're only a couple of months out of Egypt. And Moses is invited to the top of a mountain. There it is again, up to the top of the mountain. Must be closer to God, I guess, or something, right? So he goes up to the top of the mountain, and there he is with God all these days. And as he comes back down, having been given the commandments of God on stone tablets, he comes down, and there the nation in just a few short days or weeks has turned away from God, and they have created a golden calf, and they're worshiping this calf. And Moses sees it, and he's so upset. He takes these stone tablets and he throws them down on the ground, and he declares to them that God is going to judge them for abandoning the God of the universe who had brought them out of Egypt. Moses heads back up to the top of the mountain where he meets with God again, and he's had it with these people. Moses is done. He says, like, God, why would I go on with these people? You say your presence is with them, but look at what they do. God, I'm not going on if your presence isn't here. God, would you show me your glory? Would you show me your glory? To which God says, yeah. It's a dark, dark time in Israel's history. It's a dark time for Moses. What God doesn't say to him is, Moses, suck it up, princess. Go back down and lead the people. Like, what more do you need to see? Red Sea parts, cloud follows you by day, a pillar of fire by night. What more do you need? To which Moses says, I need your glory. I need to see how amazing you are, how good you are. I'm not asking you to lead us. I'm asking to see your glory, because out of that, you will lead us. And what does God do for him? We're told that he tells Moses to go out and stand on a rock, and his presence is going to go by. But Moses, don't look at my face, because nobody can look at the glory and the wonder of God's faith and live to tell about it. And evidently, this is what happens. And this is the power of God's unveiled glory. It transcends the moment, as dark or as bleak or disappointing or gloomy as it is. You bring God's glory into it, and suddenly it lights it up. It doesn't always change it, but it lights it up, because that's where his presence is. Another story that came to my mind was an incident that, again, if you're an Old Testament overachiever, you might have thought of as well. It's a story of Elijah. If you were to look at 1 Kings 19, you would see that Israel, the nation of Israel, has gone through these periods of time where there are prophets that God's appointed. These are prophets that are to be God's voice to the people, and they're to be the people's voice to God. They're intermediaries, if you will. And Elijah is one of these prophets during that era of time. However, Elijah faces what many of the prophets did, and that was the nation of Israel was easily taken away from God, and they wandered, and they weren't faithful to him. And Elijah is in one of those seasons. And they have followed some of the pagan religions of the day, and Elijah does this bold thing where he doesn't just talk to the people and inspire them to come back to God. He actually takes on the evil forces of those pagan gods, the priests and the prophets of those pagan gods, and he invites them to a competition. You might know the story very well from 1 Kings, where they go to, again, the top of a mountain. And there, the great God of heaven competes with, well, the non-existent gods that these people are following. And it's a great victory. There's a fire from heaven, and it's just, read it sometimes. It's an amazing story. And following that, it's this great victory for Elijah, right? So he leaves, and the prophets of Baal are killed, and he leaves and he heads off, and he thinks finally King Ahab and his mean-spirited wife, Queen Jezebel, just the name itself tells you about her, right? Because there's that reputation. He thinks finally they're going to be convinced that God is great, and they're not convinced. In fact, they double down on it, and there's a death warrant out for Elijah. It's not going to go well for him, and he's about had enough. He's tired, he's discouraged. He flees for an area outside of the nation of Israel. And there he sits, discouraged and defeated, and has this conversation with God where he says, God, would you just kill me? Would you just kill me? To which God says, I've got another option. What if I show you my glory? What if I show you how wonderful I am? And so he tells Elijah to go and to hide in kind of a crevice in a rock. And he says, my presence is going to pass by, but you can't look at my face, because the radiance and glory of my face, you'll die if you do, because that's the glory of God. And evidently that's what happens, and Elijah sees this. Now, I find it totally interesting. Who joined Jesus at his transfiguration? Moses and Elijah. The two people the Bible tells us had had the experience of seeing God's face. Here's the thing that's so important to remember on this one. They just reflected God's face. Jesus was the immanence of God's grace, his God present in that moment with them. He transcends anything that Moses had done. He transcended anything that Elijah had done. He now was the source himself. And what would be more encouraging to the three friends that had heard the gloomy news that they were going to Jerusalem to die and the movement would be over? It turns everything around for them, because God's presence is there in the glory of who Jesus is. So what? Right? This last year has been a challenging year for sure. There's been political fracturing. We're a disunified country. There's so much conflict over politics. There's conflict over response to COVID and how to do it like this. There's tension within churches of how churches should respond and didn't respond. And it's just a lot of tension. A lot of, gloom. What do we need? A new path, a better path forward? No. We need the glory of God. Plain and simple. We need the revelation of Jesus in our lives. And do you know something? You and I can pursue that. We can pursue his glory. It isn't just, I hope I'm going to climb to the top of a mountain and show me the light. You actually, and I actually, every day can pursue the glory. How? Because Jesus is revealed through the text of Scripture to us. Don't read it like a textbook. Read it like a revelation of the goodness of God and the story of Jesus and what he does and how he functions and how he thinks, and just this amazing, incredible King of Kings. The Scriptures reveal that. And as you approach it that way, glory is revealed. And it puts all the darkness in a whole new perspective. This is the wonder of what glory being revealed. A couple of years ago, 3 years ago or so, Alfie and I took a weekend away in San Diego. Great place to take a weekend away. We decided that we wanted to take a tour of the Midway. It's this World War II battleship, giant aircraft carrier, huge ship. It's dry docked in San Diego. And so we took like a 3-hour tour. And we actually came back from this 3-hour tour. And we were fascinated. Like, it's just this amazingly powerful ship. It's kind of dwarfed today by the more glorious new ships. But we went through it, and we were intrigued by it, captivated by it. We were done the tour, and we're standing on the wharf looking back at this giant ship. And there's a little lagoon area just beside this giant warship. And this 24, 26, 28-foot party boat comes into the lagoon area, and it's filled with about 20 people who are partying. They're having a great time, sipping margaritas or whatever they're doing, and it's like they got close enough to us, and they thought the whole world was watching them, it felt like. They turned the music up, and man, they're just making it happen. And then I look up at Midway, and I go, you guys are just pipsqueaks. That's glory. That's big. That's powerful. You're just having a party and you're missing the glory. Look at the glory. Look at the glory. You'll turn your music down a bit. You're no big deal next to that. That's a big deal. And you and I can pursue and we can experience the wonder of that glory if we will but pursue him. Does that mean that he's going to show up in radiant kind of splendor? Well, he could do that. He could. Hasn't happened often. But he has this great capacity to reveal his glory and to make sense of our situation in that moment. Jesus calls himself the light of the world. And this is what he is. He's the light of our world. I find it interesting. One last thought that struck me from this passage. When God speaks into it, Jesus' glory has been revealed, and God speaks to it, and he says, this is my son. And what does he tell people to do? Listen to him. Do you know what's a glory-sapping experience? Is to listen to someone other than him. You know what part of the darkness that we've experienced over the last 10 months? Is we've been listening to the wrong thing. Some of us are glued to CNN or Fox, or we're glued to Facebook or Instagram, or we follow this narrow focus of thought and idea that's just consistent with us, and we don't read beyond that, and we don't actually grow our knowledge. And it's just darkness when that happens. We're not asking the right person the right questions, and it takes his glory out of it. What he would say, I believe, is, as God said in that moment, listen to my son. Pursue his glory revealed through the text of Scripture and in nature in so many different ways. And get your information from him. Look to him for answers. Look for him for direction. Now, it's not bad to listen to CNN and Fox and all those other, that's okay. But not before you listen to him. Because it sucks the glory out of you. And he wants to bring glory into it by his powerful and wonderful presence. So, Jesus, show me your glory. Show me your glory and the wonder of who you are. And Jesus, would you do that? Please, would you do that? Would you reveal yourself to us as you've promised to do? It honestly, Jesus, it doesn't have to be through the spectacular light show. Wow, would that be something if it happened that way? But you have made this promise. If you will seek me with all your heart, you will find me. You will. So Jesus, would you show us the glory that's authored in you, begins in you, comes from you. May we look to you for our answers first, to give context to the other sources of information. This is my son. Listen to him, that the wonder of his glory be revealed. Jesus, show us your glory.